Welcome back to this week's edition of Freedom and Prosperity Radio. And, of course, if you miss an episode, you can go back and check in on us online at YouTube. And then you search Freedom and Prosperity Radio, and you can find archives of all of our previous programs and make it a little library. And it's not quite as neat as some of those old libraries from a Dickens novel, but it is informational, and you have some good stuff there. And, of course, find out more about all of the stuff we do at virginiainstitute.org. Just last weekend, we finished up an educational summit on voter integrity. I called it Election U because it really was education for people who would want to be poll watchers, election officials, just poll workers, because it is not as daunting as a task as people would make you think it was. And one of the folks who helped put it all together was Cleta Mitchell, and she's with the Bradley Foundation. She's on their board of directors as well as an election integrity activist. Cleta, thank you so much for helping out with the Integrity Summit this past Saturday. How did everything go?
Well, it was great, and it was sponsored by the Conservative Partnership Institute, where I'm a senior legal fellow for election integrity. We've established the Election Integrity Network, and this was something that we felt like we could do to help support the efforts of the Virginia Fair Elections Coalition. There are a lot of groups that have been working in this space, furiously trying to get people recruited to serve as election officials so we can have eyes on every ballot, both as people are voting, as the votes are being tabulated and counted and processed. We just need our people in those election offices, in the general registrar's offices. And, early voting starts in Virginia on September 17th. That's one of the great new things that the General Assembly has done, which is just makes it harder to watch and harder to staff, but
I was asked.
But we had nearly 300 people, and this was training, as you say. I like your term, election U, because it really was training. It wasn't just speeches. We had some good presentation speeches, but we really focused on trying to get people trained, and ultimately, what we'd like to see is an election integrity task force in every county and city, every voting unit in Virginia. That's really what we need, and have it ongoing, not just between now and November, but ongoing, watching what's going on in those election offices. We've left it to the left too long.
Yeah, well, and knowledge is power, and sometimes not knowing makes it more daunting to say, oh, I'll do that, because you're not really sure of all what goes on into it, and you think, oh, I'm not a lawyer, and I don't have, but, even a listener asked me, with all the new laws in Virginia regarding vote integrity, no excuse absentee, 45 days, mail-in ballots, and all of these things.
No voter ID.
Yeah, same-day registration. They're like, well, how do you look? I said, well, there are things. I said, if you notice the same handwriting on every ballot that's coming into a registrar's office, that's a red flag right there. There are still things you can do as a poll watcher.
Well, and what we want people to do is, of course, this is hard for people if they have other jobs.
Oh, yeah. But that's why lots of us help.
Yeah, but to be an election official, if at all possible, to be inside the ropes rather than outside. But if you can't do that inside the ropes and get appointed, authorized as an election official, then the next best thing is having lots of poll watchers and observers. So we're working right now to make sure that every general registrar is going to allow poll watchers during the early voting, because the way the whole statute is constructed, it's just kind of been, it's like somebody adding on to a house, but not having the same architect.
All right. No, absolutely. Yeah, that's it. Well, and I talked to the GOP chair in McGahkeysville, who said it was hard, but they managed to get enough volunteers that they could be at the registrar's office every day when the mail came in, so they could have a poll watcher there. And sure enough, the Democratic Party managed to do the same thing. But I'm sure if they didn't, nobody would have been there, and the registrar would have been able to just accept the mail and file them however they wanted. But you have to be there in order to see it. And it is, in many hands make light work and stuff like this, right, Cleta?
Well, absolutely. And just remember, I mean, we need to have one of the volunteers always that's been working with us on the coalition says eyes on every ballot. I think that's a really good eyes on every application, eyes on the voter rolls, eyes on every ballot. And you know, there are these national groups that are starting to flood Virginia with applications for absentee ballots. And I just got something this morning from someone who received an envelope, a mailing urging her to register to vote, and it was sent to her in her maiden name. She said it hadn't been her name in years.
Still finding these folks. I actually had somebody when the McDonnell administration did a little bit of poll cleanup, election roll cleanup. A friend of mine had a vacant lot that they were going to build a house on, but it had been given a street address. They actually received one of the letters saying, "Are you still living here?" Or are you? So somebody had apparently used that street address as an address to register to vote.
Well, I've got to tell you, that's a big issue, and that's one of the things that we're urging people to do by forming these local election integrity task forces, is to get the voter rolls and get the list from the U.S. Postal Service that will tell you what type of address it is, whether it's a P.O. box, whether it is a commercial, whether it's a residential, whether it's multifamily, whether it is a vacant lot. And if we see those vacant lots, you do the overlay of vacant lots and commercial addresses over the registered voter list, then you need to go out, send somebody out and just look and see, is it still a vacant lot? Is it a commercial address? If it's an office building, nobody lives there, and it's illegal to register to vote there. And those are the kinds of that's the kind of evidentiary information that should be then presented to the registrar to at least try to note that is not a legitimate address and may not be a legitimate voter.
Right, absolutely. Cleta Mitchell is on with us, the Conservative Partnership Institute, as well as the Bradley Foundation. I want to talk about H.R. 4, and I compared this infrastructure bill to the coronavirus because it seems like through gain of function, they keep adding new things on it as they experiment to it. And now I'm told that H.R. 4 is not going to come to the floor standing alone. It's going to be part of this big $6 trillion human infrastructure bill. First and foremost, take us inside the John R. Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, titled so haughtily as if somebody's voting rights have been infringed outside of the people whose votes have been diluted by fake ones.
Well, what this really is this is the Nancy Pelosi power grab bill. It is, and it's the permanent Democrats control Congress bill. That's really what it is. Literally, in this new version that they unveiled a week ago, they have put in even more radical provisions than in the prior bills. That this bill's been introduced every year since 2013 after the Supreme Court struck down the requirement that certain states and jurisdictions had to go to the Justice Department voting section, which is a hotbed of left-wing radical activist lawyers, and get Mother May I permission to move a polling place from the gym to the cafeteria in a school, and everything attendant to voting. And so the Supreme Court said that pre-clearance, it's known as pre-clearance, it was appropriate in 1965, but it was no longer appropriate in 2013, and they struck it down. Well, the Democrats and their far left-wing voting rights industry, they have a real industry. People make their living. This is all they do. And so they race around trying to find an instance of voter suppression, which they have a hard time doing. But they have reintroduced this bill every year, and then this year, a week ago, they had not reintroduced it in this Congress, and they put everything into H.R. 1, which is a monstrosity, doing away with voter ID, saying states could not prohibit ballot harvesting, states couldn't have voter ID requirements, states had to have voting rights, same-day registration, all of that. And so then today, a week ago, the Democrats finally unveiled this current version, and it's even more radical. It basically would give it make Mark Elias and the left-wing election law industry. They would never lose another case. It's like the lawyers sat down and said, well, I lost this case on this ground. Okay, let's make sure that doesn't ever happen again, and that doesn't happen again. But the most amazing thing they've done, and the reason the Democrats are so intent upon passing it, and even MSNBC had an article last Friday basically acknowledging this as though it's a good thing, is that it codifies and makes permanent many Democratic House districts, even though they don't have a majority. The Supreme Court has said that a majority of minorities in a district, in an area, that we draw in congressional and state legislative lines, that you've got to recognize that so that they can have the opportunity to elect a minority person to Congress. Now, I think that's racist, but that's what the Supreme Court has said. But Democrats have tried to extend that to say, well, even if there's not a majority of minorities, even if they're just a minority of minorities, that district should still be protected because people vote for the same political party. And the Supreme Court and every court has said, no, we're not going to do that. We're not going to codify Democrat districts. Well, guess what?
This does.
This bill does that. That's why they're so desperate, because if this were to become law, you would never have a Republican opportunity to have a majority in Congress again, ever.
Well,
that's literally what they've done.
Let me ask you this. If by attaching this, we had one of our Virginia Congress people tell us they're attaching it to the infrastructure bill, does that send it to the Senate and put it straight into a 51-50 vote?
No. My understanding is that it would still have to be separated before it goes back, because they have to separate out what I call the infrastructure, FAUX, infrastructure bill, because
Good. I like that.
There's very little infrastructure in that bill. But my understanding is that they would have to separate it. But look, who knows? Just because the rule says that now doesn't mean that they're going to follow the rules. These people are lawless. They don't follow rules. They don't follow procedures. But I understand, even as of this morning, their plan had been to have the rule presented and to start the parliamentary process last night. And I just was in communication a little while ago with the whip's office, the minority whip's office, Representative Scalise's office, and they still haven't seen a rule. So there's this big fight internally. There are 9, quote, moderate Democrats, which I think is an oxymoron, but they're supposedly holding out for wanting to pass the infrastructure bill separately before they do the budget bill. And Bill Clinton has been calling them, urging them to withdraw their objections. And one member, I just saw something was tweeted that they're talking about making sure that if he doesn't agree to this and withdraw his objection, that they're going to make sure that his congressional district is drawn so he loses. And his daughter's going to lose a job. I mean, all this. They're playing hardball.
This is like Chicago mobs. This is Fat Sam Giancana. But here's the thing. So all you have to do, as far as I understand it, is go into a congressperson's office and say, "Listen, I understand Trump won your district, by 10 points, and you just got lightning struck or whatever, and you're in there now. If you vote for this, we'll just make damn sure that this K Street lobby firm hires you, and they're going to make more money as a K Street lobbyist anyway."
Well, they do take care of their own pretty well, but usually what happens is that they find them a permanent place in government. I mean, the federal government is so populated with former Democratic operatives and campaign workers, and it's pretty startling.
Hillary and I'll hire them at the Clinton Foundation if we'll send them down to Haiti. They need more of our help down in Haiti.
That's true.
Look at how many trillions of dollars we send to the federal government, and we look at these plans, and they have nothing to do. And I'm really concerned about this human infrastructure. I like that turn of a phrase, Cleta. Aside from the budget busting, spending, it's societally horrible for us.
Well, it is quite horrible. And Nancy Pelosi is saying this is our opportunity to do something in America that we've never done before. Well, yeah, that's what scares us. Mm-hmm. We don't want that. And literally, that is what she's saying to her caucus. We have a chance to do things in America we've never done before. Now, I'd just be happy for Congress to not start doing things that we've never done before, because what they're doing is wrecking our country. They're wrecking the incentive to work, which makes people dependent on the government, which makes them susceptible to being manipulated and for their votes. I mean, it's quite frightening to me. And, I just think that what the main thing you have to understand is the linkage between these three bills. The two bills have to do with massive new programs, Green New Deal, massive spending, doing things we've never done before, and the John Lewis bill. Now, why are those connected? Well, here's why they're connected. If they do these massive things that America has never done before, then they know that that's going to be very unsettling to the vast majority of voters. So they have to pass the John Lewis bill to protect themselves from the voters, because they've just done something in America that's never been done before. And they know that they're going to get thrown out of office. And so they're trying to put themselves beyond the reach of the electorate. That is exactly what they're trying to do. They're trying to codify their majority, so no matter what they do, the people won't have any way to throw them out of office. It's that draconian. It's that Machiavellian. And, look, in the Declaration of Independence, it says that governments derive their just powers from the consent of the governed. They're trying to make it where we are, as the governed, are unable to give and withdraw consent, mainly to withdraw consent for things that they're doing that we don't approve of. That's what they're doing. That's why they're so desperate to pass the John Lewis bill.
Can we make sure that these don't use parliamentary procedure in the Senate to all of a sudden Kamala Harris is voting for the tie-breaking bill that completely remakes America on a 51-50 vote?
Well, let's hope so. Let's pray so. Yeah. I mean, the fact that the other thing, too, is that Joe Manchin, if I were Joe Manchin, I would be so angry because he said he would support the John Lewis bill in its prior incarnation. And he gave this list of things that he thought were very important, not eliminating voter ID. He supports voter ID. He says people want voter ID. And he gave this whole list of things. And guess what they did? Did they try to accommodate him? No. They took every one of the things that he said. One of the things he said, no federal takeover. Well, I mean, it was stupid for him to say that because the John Lewis bill was always a federal takeover. But now it's a federal takeover on steroids. So if I were Joe Manchin, I'd be looking at that bill saying, did you guys not hear a word I said? No, and, absolutely. And I think, we really are going to have to make Joe Manchin say, are you going to vote for something that bears no resemblance to what you previously said you would support? But he and Sinema have both continued to say that they will not vote to change the filibuster. They won't create a carve out for voting bills and
things like that.
But we do have to just be concerned that about what parliamentary maneuvers they might try to pull, because they are desperate. They are desperate to codify their majority in the House.
Cleta,
and to make sure that there all these other voting provisions that protect against fraud are never able to be instituted and will be repealed in the states that have adopted it. That's what they're trying to do.
Bradley Foundation is online at bradleyfdn.org. Cleta Mitchell, thank you so much for your time and clarifying, because people sometimes hear federal takeover of elections, eliminating the Republican Party, and they say, well, that sounds pretty extreme, but you made it sound, you boiled it down to exactly how that's going to work, and thank you so much for doing that for us this week on Freedom and Prosperity Radio.
Thank you so much. Very nice to be with you.
Thank you so much for listening as well and supporting all we do at the Virginia Institute for Public Policy, virginiainstitute.org. Find out more about our Tuesday morning group coalitions, and we will reconvene next week for Freedom and Prosperity Radio. I'm Joe Thomas. So long, and thanks for all the fish.